The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rudy Cashman, neurosurgeon, Fort Wayne, Indiana, for 41 years. But I'm only 39 years old. Let's have a little fun together. You know, I consider myself to be a doctor of wellness and a neurosurgeon. One of the books I'm working on right now is How to Live to Be 100 and to be of sound mind and of sound health. Of course, memory is a very important part of our health as we get a day on. So this is my second DVD on this very subject. You're going to find this very interesting. I've read many books and I have a lot of experience because I deal with the brain. I'm a neurologist and a neurosurgeon. Let's begin fundamentally a little bit, and then we'll go through the memory methods, things you can do to help your memory, because we all develop a few problems as we get a day younger. What is memory? Memory is our capacity to learn, our capacity to retain information. We've experienced that in school for sure. To recall information when needed. We all have a few problems with that, but some of us a little better than others. And I'm going to teach you some techniques later on that can help you with that. And to recoup periods of familiarity, things that have happened to us, they're somewhere in our memory. It's somewhere in this computer, but can we get it out is the important thing. Let's talk a little bit about types of memory. What types of memory do we have? Short-term, long-term? And we have sensory memory, where we use our senses, our 5 senses. We have memories of things that we saw. We have memory of things that we can smell or we've been touched, or things that we tasted. That's sensory memory. They are remembered a lot easier than other memories, incidentally. Then we have primary memory. That's temporary. Phone numbers. Phone numbers generally, why do we have phone numbers with 7 items in them? Because for most people, that's all we can remember. There's about 7 numbers. I've been working now and I think I can remember 10. And it's easier for me because I have to dictate at the hospital every day operations and different things, and there's numbers attached to it. So anymore, when I used to chunk it, what's called chunking, break it up into 2 sets of 3 numbers. Now I see the 6 all at once. And I'm starting to be able to memorize seeing 10 numbers at once. You have to work at it. You know, it takes practice. What's working memory? That's a memory that we use to manipulate primary memory, things that we're doing around us. That's our working memory. Doing the dishes, answering the phone. That's working memory. Then we have prospective memory. That's tracking events immediately around us. That's called generally prospective memory. Short-term memory, let's discuss that a little bit. What's short-term versus a long-term? Ability to learn new information is short-term memory. And that's what's lost in dementia. You hear them speak about Alzheimer's disease, which I personally think is a bad case of dementia, and I've written a book about that. But that is what people lose in the beginning, is their short-term memory. Long-term memory, we keep a lot longer, and you see that, frankly, in older individuals, like my mother in the 80s and 90s. I couldn't believe, although she had short-term memory problems, she could recite poetry of an unending degree. In her day in Germany, poetry, because they had no TV, no radio, nothing, they must have memorized poetry. I couldn't believe the amount of poetry she could bring back. So that's stored in a long-term memory. A rehearsal moves short-term memory to long-term memory. So you're trying to remember something, you rehearse it a few times. Like I was trying to remember a gentleman I had met in Naples, Florida. Now, they're very famous. I played tennis with him, and he was the CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art for 30 years. But his name was Philippe de Montebello. Now, how do you remember that? I rehearsed it, I kept on repeating it, and now it's in my brain. I can easily bring it up. Plus, I'm flamboyant about it, emotional about it, so it comes up a lot easier. So our short-term memory then links us to our long-term memory. That's the link. You got to get it going in short-term memory first, and then it links the past, the present, and the future. Let's speak a little bit about our long-term memory, our permanent memory. A lot of things that have happened to us are stored back there, but we don't know how to get it out. What's the cue? What's the word? What's the visualization, picture that might trigger your long-term memory? It's also called, and there are types of long-term memory. Let's talk about explicit declarative memory. That's like a college graduation, our wedding, things of that nature. That's our explicit declarative memory. A fraternity party, a Christmas party, that's explicit or declarative memory. Then we have implicit non-declarative memory. Now, implicit non-declarative memory is like playing tennis, like playing golf. We don't have to think. It's automatic. So that's called non-declarative implicit memory. I was playing tennis the other night with my friend Dr. Crawford, and he was beating me pretty good because I thought he was playing thoughtless. It was automatic. So I worked at it, trying to get him involved with conversation a little bit, and sure enough, the game changed because he switched to a declarative memory. He was starting to think. When he was thinking and not using his non-declarative memory, his game went down. I started winning. It's very, very interesting. And that's why McEnroe and these guys would disrupt the person they were playing, for example, and the game would change. So long-term memories are a store of knowledge, our persistent skills. Mental exercises help long-term memory quite a bit. And we're going to teach you some of those tricks, but it doesn't help short-term memory that much. It's kind of interesting, but it can indeed help it. So we can build a long-term memory with practice. We can build it, and there are definite techniques for helping it. So short-term memory is the entry to long-term memory. Declarative memory, let's talk about that a little bit. The explicit memory, it's also called knowing that specific fact, that event that occurred years ago. And remembering the date, for example, is declarative memory. Recalls a specific fact is declarative memory. Personal information, grandma, their names, for example, that's declarative memory. It's a basic knowledge system. Non-declarative, now we talked about implicit memory, means your golf game, your tennis game, your soccer game, whatever. It's walking, dressing, driving a car, golf, tennis. It's doing that, knowing how to do it. That is non-declarative implicit memory, and that's retained a lot more as people get a day older. That stays with them. They might have even early severe dementia, but still can play their favorite sport without difficulty. And emotional memory is another form of memory. We're much more likely to remember something if we hook emotion to it. Like I was telling you about Philippe de Montebello, the CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I mean, that meant a lot to me because I lived 3 blocks from there as a child. I used to walk through it. And to hear accidentally play tennis with them, I thought was amazing. Where's emotional memory located? It's in the amygdala, which is the medial part of the temporal lobe of your brain. There was a neurosurgeon years ago that removed the hippocampus, where short-term memory is located, in the amygdala in a patient. His name was HM, is the initials. That totally killed the short-term memory. And he lived 30, 40 years. People study him inside. He had good long-term memory, but he had no short-term memory whatsoever. You could meet him, go down the hall, come back. He would not remember ever seeing you, would not remember your name. This part of the brain is commonly destroyed by injuries. Alcohol is real good at it. Alcohol is real good at it. And so dramatic events are easier to remember because we attach an emotion to it. I mean, my meeting this president of, for 30 years of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that was emotional. It meant a lot to me. Much more easier to remember. And another thing that helps you remember something is to put a wild image to it, just like I did. I kept on describing this tennis match I had with him, and talking to him afterwards. He gave a lecture, and I put a lot of emotion to it, and I had some imagery into the thing, a picture. See, our brains has a huge capacity for visualization, for visualizing. The best golfers, it's usually the best visualizer who wins the match. So, and if you can put a wild visualization to it, for example, like today, some instruments we're using, and one is in a blue packet, another one's in a green packet, and the blue packet had to do with spinal fluid, and we're constantly getting the packets mixed up. Which one do you use for this procedure? And today we hooked ocean waves to the blue packet. Bang! We're never going to forget it. We're never forget it because what we're visualizing the ocean, the blue ocean, and that's water. Spinal fluid is water. So, and it's much more easy to remember a visualization than it is a distinct word or a distinct event. And a lot of memory techniques are based on visualization. The brain has an infinite power of visualization. It's very interesting. Things that decrease memory, distraction, we don't pay attention. Someone, and it's been a habit of mine, I'm such a busy guy and meet people all day long besides neurosurgery, different things, and someone introduce me to somebody until I learn these techniques. I'm distracted by things occurring. I dictate, for example, in my office, and the transcriber said, you know, sometimes it seems a bit garbled. Well, the trouble is people are walking by and distracting me. So it's difficult to then turn right back to the dictaphone and wait a minute, what was I dictating on? So distraction interferes with memory. Stress interferes with memory. We're constantly worrying and stressful. Stress and steroids that are produced by stress are destructive to your memory. Affects the brain cells, are destructive. A person stressed all their life more likely to have dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Depression decreases memory. Depressed people have a lot of difficulty with remembering short-term and long-term. Lack of organization affects your memory, and not paying attention in the first place. And illness affects the memory a great deal because of physiological changes in the body. And medication, of course. I see a lot of elderly patients on 15 medications. I mean, give me a break. The interaction of these just destroys their memory. They don't recognize family members, and they think it's dementia and Alzheimer's disease when actually it's medication. I see that a lot. I stop the medicine, and it's like a fog leaves their brain. And of course, alcohol does this also. And if you're meeting someone, a good thing to do is to repeat the name and really look at them, develop an image, or look for something unusual on the face, then connect it to something in your life or their life, and then make a wild visualization of it, and you're much more likely to remember it. So it's look, snap, connect, repeat. Very good way to remember people's names, which cannot, it can be difficult. Things that decrease memory, not paying attention. Remember, that's a big one. You don't hear the word in the first place. You don't look at the event in the first place. You're not going to remember it. You're not going to remember the actress in the movie if you don't look at the score to begin with. I rarely look at the score to begin with, so afterwards people ask me who was in the play. I don't know. For me, it's a stress reliever. I like the events, but I don't pay attention to the words. So to be good at that, you got to pay attention to them in the first place. Poor vision, of course, decreases memory. You can't see the event. There's a lot of memory in vision, incidentally. I had a patient about a month ago. She had a visual field defect back of the brain. She was her vision was gone from an embolus. But you know, that single embolus to the back of the brain, nowhere near the temporal lobe, whacked her memory a great deal. She complained about it bitterly. So there's a lot of memory throughout the brain, long-term memory. Poor hearing, of course. If you can't bring the information in, you don't hear it, it doesn't register in your brain, how can you possibly remember it? Alcohol is destructive to memory because, remember what I said, alcohol destroys the hippocampus and the amygdala. If you take an MRI of a patient been drinking heavy for 2 years, you look at it, I mean, you see a lot of water floating around, the brain has been destroyed, and that's not repairable. Incidentally, every drink of alcohol destroys 1,000 cells. Most of us who don't drink a lot get away with it because of neuroplasticity. We grow maybe 2,000 cells, so it isn't noticed, but believe me, it will add up. Someone drinks a lot, you look at their cerebellum, look at their hippocampus years later, you can see it on the MRI scan, the brain is missing. When I was at DC General many years as a resident, I operated a lot of blood clots because it was in the poor neighborhood, and people economically deprived drink a lot more, and you almost see the reason. And their brain shrinks, and they develop blood clots in the head commonly. I took out a blood clot of a head of a chronically drinking person, probably 1 or 2 a day. I have a lot of experience with that. Someone who drinks a lot, and I have to open the skull up, I look, brain shrunk. It's very, very common. Malnutrition, of course, leads to decreased memory also. You don't have all the enzymatic activity. It's not going to run the proper chemistry, in your nervous system. Your memory is going to be poor. And also, too few cues can affect it. If you don't get a hint sometimes at what you're trying to talk about, and there's not any cues around, it's difficult to remember something. And we could talk about memory palaces and Roman palaces, which give you cues, which the ancient people used. We'll talk about this shortly. It's a very interesting. So memory, we remember perhaps 10% of the names that we hear, maybe 10%. And we forget 90% of all the phone numbers that are given to us. Unless we pay attention in the first place, we chunk it, store it, repeat it, connect it to something, maybe some visualization or some visualization with the numbers. And I will show you ways that we can do that with numbers. Memory declines with age, less than we think. We get some memory loss as we get a day older, but it's not really that much unless we have bad habits or we've had a lot of injuries that been accidents, soccer players, football players, boxers, people who've been abused, are much more likely to have memory loss and dementia in old age because of destruction of the brain cells, memory cells. And as I already mentioned, alcohol kills about 1,000 brain cells per drink. The good news, remember 10% of the names that we hear, that we remember 10% of them, and we can do more. If you get good at these visualization techniques, connecting techniques, repeating the name, you get better. And you clearly know people around us who never forget a name. We all know that. And because they really pay attention. And I think they get emotionally involved with the individual a little bit so that they remember things about them, a lot easier to remember the name. The memory declines with age, but much less than we think. And techniques available to keep it extremely active. And that's what my memory DVD is really all about. Let's talk about memory techniques, mnemonics a little bit. Memory codes, for example. In evolutionary times, less memory was needed. They didn't have to find their way around. It was the woods. They weren't living in complex cities. They did not have to know the codes to their bank account, their phone number, all these things that we have to remember now. So memory in evolutionary times did not develop that good because it wasn't needed. It wasn't needed, but now it indeed is needed. So we don't remember all types of information the same. It's kind of interesting. We remember pictures, visual images. Remember I talked about that already? The visual part of the brain is huge. So to put a vision of something wild or crazy to something you're trying to remember, you're much more likely to remember it. We remember pictures, visual images, better than names and numbers. Numbers are more difficult to remember than a picture or a visual image. They tested some people one time. They showed them 1,000 pictures of faces, and then they tested them an hour later, and they threw in into the 1,000, maybe 100 pictures they hadn't seen. Almost to 90%, most of the people could identify the 100 they had not seen. So our memory of faces is excellent, but our memory of numbers and names is not. It's kind of interesting. Our visual memory is gigantic, and so convert the information to a kind of memory. A brain is built for vision. It's built for vision, and this probably arrived in evolutionary time because where we had to catch the picture of animals or predators that could kill us. So in our memory bank, we had these pictures. So convert to something colorful, exciting, elaborate coding, something very elaborate, something wild, a wild picture, a horse flying through the air with wings or something, if you're trying to remember a horse, for example, and much more likely to remember it. Let's talk about history of memory, but it's very interesting. The Bible of memory history really is a book written about 85 BC, and Rhetorica ad Herennium. I have that book. I actually have that book, and it's, you know, one half is in ancient languages and one is in English, and I've read a lot of it, and gives hints. And remember, in those years, they didn't have books. They had no way of storing the information. They did have papyrus starting about 300 years BC, but it was difficult to store that sort of thing. And what they did is they had a great deal of memories. I mean, the best known people were the ones with a great memory. They could memorize huge pieces of information. How'd they do it? Tony Buzan, who is alive today, from England, I believe, he's written 120 books of memory. I've read a couple of his books. And matter of fact, I have some of his books with me. Memory training was part of classical education in those years. To me, memory training should be part of our school system. That's a bad mistake. It's a bad mistake because there are techniques, because what's education about? It's about memory. It's about memory. So why not learn the best techniques? It's not taught in our school. I fail to understand the reason for that. And it's of value as you get into day on, or even before that, to develop some of these techniques to keep a sharp memory. But you got to practice it a little bit. Incidentally, a great book that just recently came out, it's worthwhile reading. It's Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Furr, a book right here. Excellent book. He was just a reporter who took an interest in this, and he met the best memorists in the world, and started practicing their techniques, maybe a half hour a day, and then maybe for 4 months he practiced 2 or 3 hours a day. You know what? You won't believe it. He won the U.S. memory contest. Unbelievable. And he looked at himself as being an average individual. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? A great book, incidentally, to read. Great book to read. So memory training should be part of all our education. And memory was sacrosanct in those years. That's they considered it so important. King Cyrus, listen to this. King Cyrus can name all the soldiers of his army through memory techniques. Isn't it something? And most of us can barely name our 30 employees. I must admit, the Amish, 13 children, 67 grandchildren. I had a lady the other day gave me the name of every one of them. that took a little doing. And ancient medieval people reserved their awe for superior memory. That was the athletic man. It wasn't the guy. It wasn't the biggest golfer or tennis player or football player. The best known people were the ones with the best memory. And artificial memory, connect images. Remember I told you about images? Connect places and palaces to rooms. They had in those years, they called them Roman palaces. Roman palaces. They would take a room, could be your own home, it could be a big palace, and they would mentally place an object in them and then hook a memory to the object. They would hook a memory to that object. And many of them had 100 or 200 palaces or rooms they would use. And they would hook a visualization or a memory to a object in that room. And they get good at it. And they would populate, they called the loci, L-O-C-I. They would populate them with their favorite and important memories. They called them palaces or Roman rooms. In ancient times is what they did. It was called the method of loci. And even before that, 1645, and this is very interesting, there was what's called the major system. Johann Winkelmann discovered this, and he had a simple code of converting numbers to names, and the names were then converted to images, a method of memory. But it takes practice, and you get better at it. It's interesting to read more about it and practice those things. And referring back to the Rhetorica ad Herennium 25 BC, the memory Bible, the funnier the images, the lewder the images, the more bizarre the images, you're much more likely to remember them. Yeah, auditory, remember the senses, we talked about using your senses. Auditory, laughable, better memories, produce better memories. The greatest memorists in the world use lavish images, wild images, and I hate to say it, pornographic images work a lot better, and And I was trying to remember the other day a banker I know and his wife, and I could never get the name straight. I could see him only once a year, but I put a visualization to it that her name is Pat. So I visualized patting her in the gluteus maximus, and she was falling into the gym. His name is Jim. It worked. Never forgot it. I saw him since, knew the name right away. An example of linking, connecting, and opposite sex memories are easier. And memory palaces, remember we talked about that? Develop a room, and you can even draw pictures of it, and keep on using the same room and hook your images to different things in there. I used my Italian shoes, for example, to hook something I would remember from Italy onto those shoes. Techniques of that nature. You can develop your own technique, of course. You can create museums, homes, neighborhoods, rich in textual associations, but it takes a little practice. I mean, memorization techniques take practice. Not a lot, maybe a half hour a day. And a good site, incidentally, to look at with memory is Worldwide Brain Club. Worldwide Brain Club. All sorts of memory techniques is a good site to follow and expand your memory. And to take an interest. I've taken a great interest in it because I'm trying to get people to live to be 100, but they got to be intelligent. You got to have a memory. They don't want to be blank. And after age 85, about half the people have really a poor memory. So that's what I don't want you to have. That's the reason I want you to learn about these things, start working at it, and I can give you a good memory. And so have about a dozen memory palaces to begin training. Is to construct them in your mind. It's hard work at first, but I'm doing it. 30 minutes a day I devote to this, looking at the website, developing a memory palace, and it's getting easier for me. Some other memory seekers. Here's a good one. Is smashing scopes. Each letter represents a method. 12 methods. Okay. The S is for synesthesia, sensuality, increased sensitivity to all your senses. So the first one, S, represents all your 5 senses. Okay, and do connected what you're trying to remember to some odor, something you hear, something that you visualize, something that you taste, something that you touch, improves your memory. Then the next one, make it move. Make the visualization, make it move. That'd be the M in smashing. The A is with the association. That's a big one. We're going to talk about that more later. Associate your memory with something. You're much more likely to remember it. That's a link, or called the PEG system. Link it to something, associate to something. That's huge. So that's the A in smashing. And incidentally, to remember smashing scope, I visualize one of these GI guys taking their scope and smashing it on the floor, their scope for doing the colonoscopy. So that's easy to remember. So, but that results in you memorizing 12 methods, 12 memory methods, okay? So remember I said movement, then association is the next one. Remember I said before, sexuality, much easier to remember something. Next, the H, humor, something funny, ridiculous, absurd, surreal. That improves your memory. And the next one, imagination. Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. I agree with that. The N stands for number. You should put things in order. you're much more likely to remember them. So have an order of sequence. P is for positive images, pleasing images, things. Negative image, you have trouble remembering something really positive. You're winning the race or whatever, something good happening. You're much more likely to remember it. And then exaggeration, really exaggerate. I mean, if you're trying to memorize an elephant as in this picture, I mean, have that big one. Really exaggerate everything about him. I was trying to remember Rod Stewart, whose music I just loved the other day. My visualization of him is two fishing rods and musical notes, huge musical notes above him. So Rod Stewart, I have no trouble remembering his name. And manage stress. Remember, we talked about stress is destructive to memory. And sometimes you have to use external memory aids. You know, what do we have these little notebooks for? You know what I mean? And keep learning sessions short and frequent. And you should every day devote a little bit of time to memory techniques. There'd be big time payoff. And maybe develop a few games you're really good and play it with your friends. You know, counting cards and reading cards. And this sort of thing could be very helpful. So we can, if you make a little bit of a game of it and demonstrate some things for your friends, you're much likely to be motivated to continue and be known for being a memorist. For example, I plan to take maybe some lessons from a memorist so I get better at it. If I'm going to give lectures on it, I think I need to demonstrate a few of the things and be good at it. Short-term memory help is more difficult, remember I said, than long-term memory help, okay? But you can be helped by repeating it, by looking, connecting, snapping it. You could always write it down, but spend a little more time and effort with your short-term memory, and you're much more likely to remember something. Pay attention. Pay attention. Hear it in the first place. A good habit. Many times I don't hear the name because I didn't listen to it, so it's difficult to remember. And repeat it a few times. Repeat the story. Make associations to something interesting, and organize the memory a bit. So occasionally you have to. We all should through the day engage a little bit of relaxation. For a few minutes, I find going to Starbucks, having some coffee, sitting down, do a little reading. So a little pause in time, I think is very good for stress reduction and also I think improving memory. A good night's sleep helps. I tell you, long-term memories are stored during the night. That's when short-term memories get converted to long-term memories. So sleep is important to have a good memory. Other things, of course, obvious things that can help you with memory, name badges, read them. You go to a party, you're wearing badges, we'd say read them. Flashcards are helpful. I know a doctor used to carry a lot of flashcards with names of his patients and the histories in them. And I think that is another one. Notebooks, journals, diaries, calendars. But these additional memory things that that we can use. Address books, grocery lists, taking notes. But again, we're trying to improve your memory itself, but we need aids, obviously. And tape recorders, computers, clocks and watches, pagers, fill boxes, organized workspace, visual memory. Memory is the best of the techniques that we can use. What about memory aids? Long-distance numbers, for example. A very good book to read is Jerry Lucas, The Memory Book. I'll hold it up for you. It's very good, and he discusses a lot of the techniques there of remembering numbers. And obviously what they do with numbers, they'll hook it to something, to phonetic sounds. That's a popular one, phonetic sounds, or to a visualization, wild visualization. These are all memory techniques, and they take some practice. Numbers are the most difficult of our memories. Yeah, they're the most difficult of our memories. And the first thing they might connect it to is the phonetic alphabet. An example would be one connect to a T or a D. Now a T obviously has a vertical downstroke in it, so it's easier to associate to a one, and it sounds a little. And so that's a phonetic connection of one to the T or a D. That's what's commonly done. Another example would be two and an N. An N has two downstrokes in it, so that would be two. But you have to practice that and get so good at it that you recognize it immediately, and then they'll turn it right around and take that phonetic memory and convert it perhaps to a word or perhaps to some visualization. And that takes a little practice. 3M, 3 downstrokes in the M, for example. That's a phonetic connection to 3 would be an M. And you need to know about that to get onto that. That takes a little bit of work. PEG system, you hear about this a lot. And they'll use connect the phonetic to would be Noah, for example. That's the actual word, not just the letter, but the actual word. And 3, they'll use the phonetic M, 3 downstrokes in the M. But Ma is the official phonetic word for 3, not just phonetic letter, is also the phonetic word. And that takes practice. These are PEG words, for example, to the first, through the numbers, essentially, we got 9 of them down here, but essentially through 10. Tai, Noah, Rai, Law, Shu, Cow. These are PEG words that are attached to specific letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, and specifically attached to that. And playing cards, how do you do? How can you take advantage of that? I mean, I know some people go to Las Vegas, they can count cards. How do they do it? It's a combination of memory systems and knowledge of the game. You got to know the game, okay? Now, blackjack is the only game you can beat the odds by card counting. And I know people who can do that, and who can do it, and they're good at it. They're barred. Some of them, they figure out who they are, and they bar them from the casino. And there have been some movies done about that. And then, of course, once you know a certain amount of cards, and you've memorized them, and you know the deck, even with 3 decks, it's a little tougher, but you can still do it. You start doubling your bets, and that's where the money is made. And so you make the intangible tangible, okay? You link the card to a concrete item, the card to a number or to a visualization. You also form a picture. Visualization for each card is helpful. For example, the Ace of Clubs, they visualize a cat. The Ace of Hearts, they visualize a hat. These are links. These are pegs, they would be called. So card words are just as helpful. And memory demonstration numbers, peg and card words. They make the good memorist can demonstrate this, and you can do it. That's work. You got to do work. So picture one item instead of another. That's the linking. One item or another. And a tree instead of an airplane, for example. That's a linking system. And remember, do it out of proportion. Larger than life. Larger than life. And you can connect 10 obscure things that have no relation to each other, like a horse and a tree and a plane. And you can see the horse landing on top of the tree. And you can link each word with some wild visualization. Before you know it, you've connected in order the whole 10 things that are not related to each other. How can you do it? You can do it with a crazy visualization. You can do it with a crazy visualization, which is much more easy to remember than these 10 unrelated words. But some real wild visualization and story in the visualization, you can remember those 10 unrelated words. And so that's the role of exaggeration, and put some movement into it. You're much more likely to remember it if you put some movement into it. Remember what I said about the link system? Make the pictures ridiculous. It's much easier for children. You notice our kids can memorize things like easier because the children's ability to visualize is much better than ours. Much better than ours. That's the reason. And visualization, the occipital lobe, is a large part of memory, and it's untapped in our memory. It's untapped, and we have tremendous amount of memory available to us. And if you started memorizing something every minute for the next 100 years, your brain will still have enough room left to store it. Absolutely. You would not believe that, yeah. So our brain is huge in the ability to store memories, especially visual memories. And I already mentioned my patient with a visual field defect and the memory loss who couldn't see part of the visual field. The occipital lobe had a stroke in it, but it whacked his memory. You wouldn't have thought that. It's not the temporal lobe. And although long-term memories are generally throughout our brain, just a memory in the temporal lobe, parietal lobe, frontal lobe, occipital lobe, but quite a bit back there. So avoiding a stroke, pretty important. Association wins first place for memory techniques. Search, connect the information to something. All memory, trained or untrained, is based on associations. It's based on associations. Original awareness, we don't hear the thing in the first place. That's the point. If you don't hear it, your brain isn't going to register it. You can't remember it. So got to pay attention and hear it in the first place, okay? Association, as soon as though you're trying to associate what you hear with something, that forces original awareness. As soon as you're trying to connect it to something, now you're aware. Now you're aware. That's the reason association is so important. That's really the crux. Right away, connected to something, associated to something, and now you're aware that the event occurred. If you don't associate, it leaves your memory pretty quick. It leaves your memory, that phone number, gone. Associate with something. So that's really critical. Abstraction makes it more difficult. Make it concrete. Make it a real wild visualization. So don't do something abstract. But abstracted things or words are more difficult to remember because you're having trouble associating with something. So things with meaning are much easier. Philippe de Montebello had some meaning to me. Easier to remember. It's much easier to remember. So emotional things are easy to remember. We talked about that. And so all learning really is linked to memory. Learning, remember, is search for information, remembering information, and applying information. That's learning. When you do all three, then you link them together, you associate them together, and there's no question, once you give a little talk about it, like a lot of lectures I give, a lot of times now, as many as I give, I really don't have to look at anything. I could give them without notes, without PowerPoints, because I've associated a lot of the lectures with each other, sometimes with the audience, and it's a lot easier to remember them. No doubt about that. And so the association is critical. And usually you associate subconsciously without having to think about it. But if you don't recognize the association and you do it subconsciously, what good is it? You're not going to remember it. You've got to do it consciously, that you're constantly aware of it. So subconscious association is tough to retrieve. It has to be consciously done. So, and we hit and miss with this all our life, you know. We don't pay attention. We're busy doing something and the wife's talking to us, or vice versa. And if you're not paying attention to her, you're going to remember what she said. Later she brings it up. You never heard it. And so now I'm going to read to you the basic memory rule. This is critical, okay? This is critical. You can remember any new information. You can remember any new information if it is associated to something you already know or remember. Let me say it again. You can remember any new information if it is associated to something you already know or remember. Boy, that's the Bible of it all here. That's really the magical words. Make some more examples. Music playing, for example. You can sometimes have a few sayings, mnemonics that you can use. Every good boy does fine. E, G, B, D, and F. Using the piano, for example, the beginning piano player. Which reminds me, I'm taking music lessons now again for about 5 years. And it expands your brain. You get better at it. Couldn't play the saxophone 5 years ago, now I can play it. I can read the notes now, before I couldn't. So that's a good thing to do, especially as your days goes on. And associations are critical. Like use maps, for example. You have, suppose you're thinking about Italy, and we all can remember Italy quite easily because it's shaped like a boat. That's easy to remember. But how about the shape of Russia? That's a horse of another color because we can associate it to something. And so this is, again, a link. We're lacking a good link, although I'm sure we could dream of something there. And another mnemonic you could use, like Holmes, for Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Lake Superior. Holmes, there's a good mnemonic to help you. And you must constantly associate something you already know. That's trained memory. Let's talk a little bit more about the books that I've been reading here. This Moonwalking with Einstein, I think, is a very good beginning book if you would like to read about memory. It's really goes through the history. It goes through the history of it. And then eventually he wins a memory contest. They have, incidentally, memory contests in the country every year. They have them all over the world. They're actually all over the world. You can also, and the website I wrote to you earlier of the World Club, Worldwide Memory Club, I think, Brain Club. This would be a very good site to get interested. You can also look at my website, Cashman Mind Body, and then go to Rudy's Brain Gym. And on this, I list the longevity index, the longevity mind body index. And there are also all great websites that you can use to train your brain. Pogo is on there. There's enough free games in there. I don't think you get through it in a year. All types of games you could play. If you did it for a half-hour day, it's going to improve your memory. Your visual memory will improve. Your movement, your balance will improve, and that's been proven. There are all sorts of links also, because there are many companies now developing sites to help train your memory. Some you got to pay a little bit for. I don't charge anything, but some, Docum system, for example, you can go in there and you got to pay them $25 or something. I forget what it is to use their sites. But I recommend that. I list them all on there, and also the Longevity Mind Body Index. I list about 25 things that you can do to keep a sharp mind and to live to be 100. I mean, that's really the aim I'm trying to use. I read another book recently, which I think is a good one to read. This is by Bill Beckwith. He's from Naples, Florida, where I was vacationing. And I ran across this book. He's a psychologist, and he writes a great deal about memory techniques, also about a bit about dementia. I'd like to mention again, because I've read a book called The Fraud of Alzheimer's Disease. What do you mean, Dr. Cashman? What are you talking about? All we read about is Alzheimer's disease that I personally think, and there's a Dr. Peter Whitehouse wrote a book called The Myth of Alzheimer's Disease. I found the book and read it. It's very scientific. He was a researcher on 2 of the medications, Aricept and one other one. He says they don't work. So we're spending all this money on people, wasting all this money, and he does not think that Alzheimer's disease is a separate disease entity. He thinks it's just a bad case of dementia. I happen to agree with that. And I think what we're doing to people today is getting them to live into the role. You miss a few words, you get dementia. What's going to happen? You're going to get Alzheimer's disease. We become depressed, we quit working, we stop doing things, and we're living into the role. I think he has a big point. And I think we should be very careful before we label somebody. There are indeed genetic cases, I think, of severe dementia, no doubt about it. But let me tell you something. In 50 years of research, we have not come up with a single thing that helps severe dementia, except prevention. And that's what I'm all about. I think we can prevent a great deal of dementia. I mean, how do you do that? Well, number one is don't go down my list of what I have on my website. I mean, don't destroy your brain with alcohol, for example. You can't be 80 years old and be taking 15 medications. Your memory is going to get whacked. Practice these memory techniques at any age, but even more important at a young age, so you get good at them as days go on. Pay attention, link to things, hook things up to visualizations, and use some of these memory techniques, become good at them. And it becomes important. There's no question that we do have some memory loss, and it picks up after age 80, 85, and 90. And the reason I think that necessarily Alzheimer's disease may not be a true entity, because the things that supposedly cause it, they're not sure. Amyloid bodies, fibrillary tangles are found in normal people, and they have some people who have terrible dementia. They don't find any of them in them. That was a study done on Notre Dame nuns, not at Notre Dame University, but I think in Iowa or someplace up there at a nunnery. They did autopsies on every one of them, and they found that there was not a clear-cut correlation between neurofibrillary tangles and amyloid plaques. So, and that makes it hopeful for all of us. I think an industry has been established, research projects, everybody's getting a lot of money, and we've had zero progress. You know, they got really excited in the New York Times the other day, because now with spinal tap, they can tell you got dementia. I may tell you honestly, why would you want to know that? Why would you want to know that? Destroy you, become depressed? I don't think that is necessarily very helpful. Dr. Beckwith's book is really from a psychological standpoint, and he talks about early memory loss, age-related memory loss, all these things that you might encounter. But what I think is more important, I think, get out of our DVD to do some more reading and learn and participate in some of these techniques of improving your memory. Of course, being very active is helpful. For example, I'm a neurosurgeon. Last year I wrote 5 books. I read books regularly, so reading maybe a book a week is very good for maintaining a good memory. And practicing these memory techniques, you know, that we talked about. Continue to work, for example, where you're forced to come up with people's names, where you are forced to do some reading and do things. And I think a big thing that I find for memory is to develop a purpose in life. Have a purpose. I feel so lucky. I got a purpose. I'm trying to get people well. I teach wellness. That's really my purpose in life. So I think as you get a day on, don't retire, sit back behind the TV set and stop using your brain. Watching a football game is passive. It's a passive activity. And then you're drinking alcohol, probably eating the wrong food. That's destructive to memory. That's destructive to memory. Where's your memory located? Your memory is located in neurotransmitters and little tiny vesicles, which have about 5,000 molecules, and these vesicles jump from one nerve to the next. The axon of one, it jumps across to the dendrite of the other, and the message gets pulled on. So how many neurotransmitters that you have that jump across these nerves, how many of these vesicles that you have that carry your memory determines how good your memory is. And of course, if you've had multiple injuries in your lifetime, suppose you now have type 2 diabetes, fat is destructive to memory. It's destructive to memory because fat has in it 20 nasty chemicals. And these chemicals interfere with nerve conduction. And so it's much higher rate of dementia and memory loss in type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is totally preventable and reversible. I wrote a book on it, Reversing Type 2 Diabetes. If you're watching this DVD, go get that book because you will have accelerated memory problems no matter what you do if you're type 2 diabetic. And if you get to normal BMI, you can get rid of this disease. Another book which I read here by Jerry Lucas, famous basketball player, is a very good book. And he travels around the country. He still does today. And matter of fact, I was trying to get him to Fort Wayne maybe to give a lecture, but the cost was a little beyond what I was willing to pay. But he has excellent technique that he's developed in the PEC system, the link system, counting cards, and he has excellent memory, which so to read some books about it, I think is very good. Where am I basically coming from in this? Being a wellness doctor, I tell you, 75% of the people that I look at in terms of healthcare need a coach. I'm just trying to be a coach. I'm trying to keep you healthy. So I'm trying to teach you to eat a proper diet, to exercise regularly. This is going down my longevity mind-body index, frankly. Use computer games, eat the right food, take up some music, and a lot of this information that might interest you, you can get at the Cashman Mind Body Institute, which I have at Lutheran Hospital. I probably have in there now 25 DVDs, 10 CDs, 10 books. The book I'm writing at the moment here, How to Live to be 100, Be of Sound Mind and Sound Health, should be out in about 2 months. I think it'd be interesting to read. I have another one coming out shortly on chronic pain, if you'd be interested in that, because I think there are too many narcotics used today, and I've written a pretty tough book on that. I'm trying to be Dr. Wellness. I'm trying to get you well without a prescription, injection, or an operation, although I'm a surgeon. Remember, I've been doing this business for 41 years and still having a good time doing it. But I think having a purpose and working regularly like me, I think exemplifies what I'm trying to get you to do. For example, I eat high-dense nutrient-type foods, which I'm trying to get you to eat for sound memory, and so you don't get diabetes, heart disease, or vascular disease. If you develop diabetes, heart disease, vascular disease, and you have strokes, obviously, because you're destroying part of your brain, what do you think is going to happen to your memory? I mean, you're going to have memory loss. Most people that I treat who've had a stroke have memory problems. So in summary, let's, for the future, trying to get a good memory, let's eat the right food, let's exercise regularly, let's do stress reduction, because steroids are destructive to the memory. Let's do some reading and learn these memory techniques. Let's use a computer and play games. Let's take up some music, maybe a musical instrument, maybe take up dancing, maybe take a few supplements, and let's try to get some stress out of our life, because steroids interfere with the intel chips of our body. And hope you attend some of our lectures. We give free lectures at Lutheran Hospital once a month on about every aspect of the mind and the body. And we have CDs on them, DVDs, and now about 10 books. It sure has been fun speaking to you tonight, and I hope that we see you at one of our seminars, lectures, and look at some of DVDs, CDs, and books. Namaste. Thank you very much.